The gala was a symphony of polished silver, crystal, and whispered fortunes. The air in the ballroom of the Atherton Grand hummed with the quiet power of Silicon Valley's elite, a currency far more potent than the champagne flowing like water. I, Leo Thorne, stood at the periphery, a ghost at my own feast. This annual summit for our company, Ethelgard Systems, was my brainchild, my legacy, funded by the last of my father's life insurance payout. And tonight, it was the stage for my execution. I watched my wife, Clara, move through the crowd. Her laughter, a sound I once lived for, now felt like a precisely calibrated instrument. She was radiant in a gown that cost more than my first car, holding court with investors and tech journalists. For 7 years, I had let her be the face of Ethelgard. She was the charismatic visionary, the one who could sell a dream. I was the quiet engineer in the background, the man introduced as Clara's supportive husband who handles the technical side. The truth was a different circuit board entirely. I owned 72% of Ethelgard. I'd written every line of code for our quantum encryption software, the very product that had just valued our company at nearly $1 billion. Clara's role was presentation. She decided on UI aesthetics, gave the TED Talks using slides I crafted, and accepted awards for innovations she could no more build than fly to the moon. The music faded, and the spotlight found the stage. Not Clara, but Julian Croft, her co-CEO, and the man whose venture capital firm had taken a minority stake a year ago. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, silver-haired, with a voice that could convince you to buy your own thoughts back from him. He was a shark in a Brioni suit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed, smooth as aged whiskey. "We stand here tonight on the precipice of a new era for Ethelgard. Our growth has been phenomenal, our vision unparalleled." He paused, a practiced dramatic beat. But true vision requires not just brilliance, but the courage to seize opportunity, to leave behind what and who holds us back. My blood ran cold. A premonition slithered down my spine. Julian's gaze swept the room and landed not on the audience, but directly on Clara, who was watching him with a look of rapt admiration. For months I've had the privilege of working alongside a true genius, a woman whose strategic mind is matched only by her grace, a woman trapped in the shadow of a partner who doesn't share her ambition. He descended from the stage, walking toward our table. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. 300 pairs of eyes followed him, then swiveled to me, a wave of silent, crushing judgment. "Clara," he said, stopping before her and taking her hand. He dropped to one knee. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. A velvet box appeared in his hand, opening to reveal a diamond that could power a small laser. "This company, this future, it's yours. You built it. Leave the dead weight behind. Marry me. Let's build an empire together." The silence was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes shimmering with manufactured tears. She looked from Julian's earnest face to mine, a mask of pitying regret on her own. "Oh, Julian, yes," she breathed, her voice microphone clear in the hush. 1,000 times, yes. Then she added the knife twist, delivered with surgical precision to the crowd. He never understood what we were building, and he certainly never knew that my shares, combined with yours, give us controlling interest. The applause erupted, deafening, celebratory, a roaring approval of my professional and personal annihilation. Cameras flashed, capturing my wife, the woman I'd built a life and a company with, embracing another man, the conqueror claiming his prize. I sat frozen, the dead weight at the table of honor, a monument to failure. My name is Leo Thorne. I am 36 years old, and in the span of 60 seconds, I had lost my wife, my company, and my dignity in front of the very industry I helped to create. But as I watched Julian kiss Clara, a strange calm settled over me. They were celebrating a victory with a company they didn't own, using technology they didn't understand, funded by money that was never theirs. They thought the quiet engineer had been defeated. They didn't realize he had just begun to debug the most complex system of all, their downfall. The sound of applause followed me like a phantom limb as I walked out of the ballroom. Each step on the Atherton's imported marble was a metronome counting down the end of my old life. The looks from guests were a cocktail of pity, schadenfreude, and cold curiosity. I heard the fragments of whispers. Always knew he was just along for the ride. Clara deserves a real king. What did he actually do at that company anyway? The humid night air of San Francisco hit my face like a slap, waking me from the stunned daze. My driver, Marcus, was leaning against the town car, scrolling on his phone. He looked up, his easy smile vanishing when he saw my face. "Mr. Thorne? The party can't be over already." He trailed off, noticing the absence of my wife. "It is for me, Marcus," I said, sliding into the plush leather interior. "Home, please. And thank you for everything." His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, filled with a quiet understanding that needed no words. He simply nodded and put the car in drive. As we pulled away, I caught one last glimpse through the ballroom's vast windows. Julian had his arm around Clara, holding her close as they accepted congratulations from a ring of sycophants. They looked like a royal couple on their coronation day. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Julian Croft was a vulture capitalist who'd made his fortune by leveraging debt, stripping assets, and firing employees to juice quarterly reports for a quick flip. He hadn't innovated a thing in his life. He'd inherited his first fortune and used it as a hammer to break apart other people's dreams. His courtship of Ethelgard and Clara had begun 9 months ago. He'd initially tried to buy me out. I'd refused. Our technology was too valuable, too transformative to be milked for profit and discarded. So he changed his target. He started mentoring Clara, taking her to power lunches, introducing her to his influential circle. He fed her ego with tales of her untapped potential, whispering that I was holding her back, that my engineering mindset was too narrow for the global domination she deserved. I'd been too buried in the work, in perfecting our next-gen algorithm to see the poison seeping into my own home. I remembered a night 2 months ago. I was working late in my home office, debugging a particularly stubborn line of code. Clara thought I was asleep. I overheard her on the phone, her voice a low, intimate murmur. "He's obsessed with the details, Julian. The architecture, the math. He can't see the forest for the trees," she whispered. "You're right. He's a brilliant mechanic, but he's not a driver. He doesn't have the vision to take us where we need to go." I had clenched my fist so hard my nails left half-moons in my palms. I was the one who had designed the goddamn car. I had given her the keys and the map, and she was now complaining to a passenger that I didn't know how to enjoy the ride. The limousine climbed the winding road to our modern glass and steel home in Pacific Heights, a house I designed, a view I paid for, a security system I programmed. It was a monument to a partnership that had just been revealed as a 7-year-long lie. The house was dark and silent when I entered. The automated lights flickered on, their warm glow feeling like a mockery. I went straight to my study, bypassing the living room, where we'd hosted countless parties for her contacts. The built-in safe behind a panel of mahogany was my sanctuary. My fingers flew over the digital keypad, the date of my father's death. Clara had never asked what it meant. Inside were not stacks of cash, but something far more valuable: the truth. The original incorporation documents, showing my 72% stake. The patent filings, every single one with inventor Leonardo Thorne, bolded at the top. The bank records tracing the $8 million from my father's insurance policy straight into Ethelgard's seed funding account. Clara had contributed nothing but her name and her charm. I booted up my personal terminal, a machine completely isolated from Ethelgard's network. I accessed the company's internal logs using backdoor protocols I had built into the system's foundation, a fail-safe even Clara didn't know about. What I found made my stomach lurch. For the past 4 months, Julian Croft had had full access to our most sensitive servers. Clara had provided him with administrative credentials. He hadn't just been stealing my wife. He'd been conducting a digital reconnaissance mission. The logs showed him downloading proprietary code, financial projections, client lists, and, most damningly, the schematics for our unfinished Project Chimera, the next-generation algorithm that would make our current tech obsolete. This wasn't a romance. It was a corporate heist, a hostile takeover packaged in a diamond ring, and a public proposal. My phone buzzed on the desk. Clara's face flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text lit up the screen. "Leo, where are you? We need to talk like adults." Julian is being more than generous. He's willing to offer you a very fair buyout for your minority share. You can walk away with enough to never have to work again. Don't make this messy. Minority share. Messy. The audacity was breathtaking. She had fully absorbed Julian's reality distortion field. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and made 2 calls. The first was to my lawyer, Eleanor Vance, a woman known in legal circles as the Velvet Hammer. Eleanor, it's Leo. We have a situation. Code black. There was a brief pause on the other end. I'm listening. I outlined the betrayal, the stolen access, the impending buyout. Understood, she said, her voice crisp and cold. I'll start drafting the motions. We'll freeze everything. He's violated more non-disclosure and intellectual property laws than I can count on one hand. The second call was to my lead engineer at Ethelgard, a brilliant, fiercely loyal woman named Maya. Maya, it's Leo. Implement Loki protocol, now. Full lockdown. No one gets in or out of the core architecture. Loki protocol? Jesus, Leo, that'll halt all development, she said, her voice tight with alarm. It'll halt a lot more than that if we don't. Trust me, I'll explain soon. I hung up and looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the glittering skyline of San Francisco. Somewhere out there, Clara and Julian were toasting their future with my champagne, on my dime, using my dreams as their confetti. They thought the game was over. They thought they had won. But they had just triggered the silent kill switch, and they didn't even know the game had begun. Dawn broke over the bay, painting the sky in hues of orange and grey, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I hadn't slept. The study was now a war room, its sleek surfaces buried under a snowdrift of paper contracts, patents, and the damning server logs that traced Julian's digital fingerprints all over my intellectual property. Eleanor Vance arrived at 7 a.m., a silhouette of sharp efficiency against the morning light. She placed her briefcase on the desk with a definitive click. Leo, she began, her eyes scanning the organized chaos. I've reviewed the documents you sent. Your position is formidable. The incorporation paperwork is ironclad. The patents are exclusively in your name. Julian Croft isn't just engaging in a hostile takeover. He's committing industrial espionage on a grand scale. She opened her own folder, revealing a meticulously organized timeline. He's good, I'll give him that. He's been methodical, but arrogant. He assumed your technical focus meant you weren't paying attention to the business mechanics. His first mistake. What's his play, Eleanor? I asked, my voice rough from coffee and lack of sleep. A classic squeeze, she explained. He's using the narrative of your personal failure to create doubt among your investors and board. He'll argue that your leadership is unstable, that Clara is the true visionary being held back. He'll pressure them to vote for a merger under his control, using Clara's controlling interest, which she doesn't have as leverage. Meanwhile, his tech team is probably right now trying to reverse engineer your code based on what he stole. As if on cue, my phone vibrated. Maya. Leo, it's done. Loki protocol is active. The core repository is encrypted behind a new quantum key that only you and I can generate. The entire dev team is locked out. She paused. And you were right. We detected intrusion attempts from 3 external IP addresses in the last hour. They're trying to access the Chimera files. The protocols block them, but they're persistent. Good work, Maya. Stand by. I looked at Eleanor. He's already trying to crack the safe. Eleanor allowed herself a thin, cold smile. Then let's give him something else to think about. She slid a document across the desk. It was a cease and desist order, so densely worded with legal threats it could have been used as a blunt instrument. It cited specific statutes for intellectual property theft, unauthorized computer access, and corporate sabotage. This gets delivered to his office and to the board this morning. It formally notifies him that he is the subject of a criminal investigation and that any attempt to access, use, or profit from Ethelgard's IP will result in immediate injunctions and civil suits totaling billions. While Eleanor worked her legal magic, I accessed another system, the financial audit trails. Arthur Webb, my forensic accountant, had been working through the night. Leo, Arthur's voice was grim over the speakerphone. It's worse than we thought. Julian's venture firm, Croft Capital, is a house of cards. He doesn't have the liquid assets to buy a lemonade stand. let alone Ethelgard. His entire operation is debt-financed. He uses the assets of one acquisition as collateral to secure the loans for the next. It's a Ponzi scheme for the private equity world. He continued. He's already taken out massive loans against the imminent acquisition of Ethelgard. Banks are lending based on the perceived value of your technology, which he claims he's about to control. If he fails to acquire us, the whole debt collapses. He's not just trying to steal your company. He's betting his entire existence on it. This was the chink in his armour. Julian wasn't a titan. He was a gambler on a catastrophic losing streak, and he'd just bet everything on a hand he'd cheated to get. But he didn't have the cards he thought he did. My phone lit up again. This time it was a number from Croft Capital, Julian's lawyer. "Mr. Thorne, my name is David Sterling. I represent Mr. Croft. We need to discuss a path forward regarding Ethelgard. This public spectacle isn't good for anyone. My client is prepared to make a generous offer for your shares to resolve this cleanly and allow the company to move forward under stable, unified leadership." The gall was astronomical. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Your client has been attempting to illegally access my company's servers for the last 4 hours. He is in possession of stolen intellectual property. Any offer he makes is based on fraudulent pretenses. You have been served with a cease and desist. Any further communication can go through my lawyer, Eleanor Vance." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. He hadn't expected me to be this prepared. He'd expected a heartbroken, defeated engineer, easy to bully into a cheap settlement. "Mr. Thorne, I'm sure we can—" I hung up. The battle lines were drawn. The legal offensive had begun. But I knew Julian. He was a predator. Cornered predators become desperate, and desperate predators make mistakes. I was counting on it. The call from Clara came an hour later. The sweetness in her voice was gone, replaced by a steely, business-like tone that I barely recognized. "Leo, this childishness has to stop. Locking down the servers, sending threatening legal documents, you're destroying the company you claim to love." "I'm protecting it, Clara, from a hostile takeover by a con man." "Julian is a visionary," she snapped. "He sees the bigger picture. You never did. You were always hunched over your keyboard, obsessed with bits and bytes, while I was out there building the brand, making the connections, doing the real work." The rewriting of history was complete. In her mind, she was the genius, and I was the technical assistant who'd gotten too big for his boots. "The real work pays for the Versace dresses, Clara," I said flatly, "and the 72% stake in the company that I own." There was a silence. I could almost hear the cognitive dissonance crashing around in her head. Julian's narrative was so much more appealing than the inconvenient truth documented in our safe. "Your stubbornness is going to ruin everything," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "We're coming to the office. We're taking control. The board is on our side." "Looking forward to it," I said, and ended the call. I arrived at Ethelgard's headquarters before them. The office had a strange, frozen energy. The development floor was silent, monitors dark, locked by Loki protocol. Employees huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. They looked at me with a mixture of sympathy, curiosity, and fear. Maya met me at the door to my lab. "They're on their way up," she said. "And, Leo, I did what you asked. The breadcrumb is in place." I nodded. We had prepared a little gift for Julian, a single, heavily encrypted file deep within the server, labelled Chimera Core Alpha. It was a phantom, a digital honeypot. To anyone trying to steal it, it would look like the crown jewels. In reality, it was a sophisticated piece of malware designed to report its location and every user who interacted with it back to me. If Julian took the bait, it would be irrefutable evidence of his theft. The elevator doors pinged open. Clara and Julian stepped out, flanked by 2 lawyers, including the flustered David Sterling. Julian looked every bit the conquering hero, his arm possessively around Clara's waist. She held her head high, but I saw the faint tremor in her hand. "This ends now, Thorne," Julian announced, his voice echoing in the quiet office. "The board is convening an emergency meeting at noon. They've seen the damage your irrational actions are causing. They're prepared to vote on installing interim leadership." "Interim leadership meaning you, I assume," I said, not moving from the doorway to my lab. The company needs stability, Clara said, finding her voice. Your lockdown is costing us millions by the minute. You're not a CEO, Leo. You're a saboteur. I'm the one preventing a saboteur from walking out the door with 7 years of my life's work, I replied. I looked at Julian. How's the reverse engineering going, Julian? Hit a few snags with the quantum encryption. His smile tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't, I turned to Clara. And you. Did you ever bother to read the patents you so proudly presented? Did you ever once look at the name on them, the inventor, the assignee? Or were you too busy planning your future empire with a man who's about to be bankrupt? You're pathetic, she spat, trying to cling to something you never really built. Before I could respond, Julian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and a triumphant smirk spread across his face. He showed it to Clara, who looked back at me with vindictive glee. The vote is moved up, Julian declared. The board is ready now. Let's go downstairs and make this official. Your little tantrum is over. They turned and marched back towards the elevator, their lawyers in tow. I stayed where I was. Maya looked at me, worried. Leo, the board, if they vote. They won't, I said quietly, checking my own phone. A text from Eleanor Vance had come through 30 seconds earlier. It's done. The packages have been delivered. The SEC, the FBI Cyber Division, the major creditors of Croft Capital, they all have the full forensic audit. The House of Cards is coming down. Right now. As the elevator doors closed on Clara and Julian's smug faces, I knew they were descending into a different world than the one they'd left an hour ago. They were heading to a boardroom they believed was theirs to command. They had no idea they were walking into a courtroom. The boardroom on the top floor was a glass-walled cage overlooking the city. By the time I entered, the atmosphere was already thick with tension. The 12 members of Ethelgard's board, a mix of early investors and industry veterans, were seated around the massive oak table. Clara and Julian sat at the head, their expressions a mask of confident authority that was beginning to show hairline fractures. Julian was mid-sentence, his voice a commanding boom meant to dominate the room. And so, given the clear instability in leadership and the urgent need to protect shareholder value, I'm asking for a vote of no confidence in Leonardo Thorne and the immediate appointment of interim management to steer us through this crisis. He finished with a flourish, leaning back in his chair as if the matter were already settled. Clara nodded beside him, her hand resting on his arm in a show of solidarity. All eyes turned to me as I stood quietly by the door. Instability? I asked, my voice calm, cutting through the silence. The only instability here is the man who just committed corporate espionage and is trying to sell you a company he doesn't own with money he doesn't have. Julian's laugh was a short, harsh bark. More desperate lies from a man who can't accept his time is over. The floor is for the board, Thorne, not for your hysterical fiction. I didn't look at him. I addressed the board, my gaze moving from one familiar face to another. 6 hours ago, Mr. Croft gained unauthorized access to our secure servers and attempted to download the core architecture for Project Chimera. His attempts triggered security protocols I personally implemented. Every keystroke, every download attempt is logged and time-stamped. The data is right here. I placed a slim data drive on the table. It makes for interesting reading. David Sterling, Julian's lawyer, stood up. This is a gross mischaracterization. Mr. Croft, as a significant stakeholder and in light of the impending management change, was performing due diligence to assess company assets. Due diligence, I repeated. Is that what you call using credentials provided by a minority shareholder with no authority to grant them? Credentials that were revoked the moment the theft was detected. I turned to the board. Check your emails. You've just been sent a copy of the cease and desist order from my lawyer, along with the relevant logs. This isn't diligence. It's theft. I could see the shift happening. Board members were subtly opening their tablets, their eyes scanning the documents Eleanor had sent. Murmurs began to ripple around the table. Clara stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Paranoia. A total lack of trust. Leo has always been possessive, secretive. He hoards knowledge because he's afraid someone will realize he's not the genius he pretends to be. It was a breathtaking performance, but the script was falling apart. Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped in, their presence sucking the air from the room. They held up badges. FBI, Julian Croft. Julian froze, his smugness evaporating into sheer, unadulterated panic. "What is the meaning of this?" he blustered, but his voice lacked its earlier power. "Mr. Croft, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and unauthorized access of a protected computer system," the lead agent said, his voice flat and professional. "You have the right to remain silent." The words became a dull roar in the background. The board watched, stunned into silence as Julian was read his rights. Clara stared, her mouth agape, her hand falling from his arm as if it were poisoned. The reality of her chosen champion of fraud being led away in handcuffs was crashing down upon her. As the agents led a pale and shaking Julian from the room, the second suit approached the table. He was from the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Ladies and gentlemen, as of this moment, Croft Capital is under federal investigation for operating a fraudulent investment scheme. All its assets are frozen. Any deal involving the transfer of Ethelgard shares to Mr. Croft or his entities is null and void." The silence that followed was absolute. The coup was over. It had died not in a fiery battle, but in the cold, precise language of federal law. I looked at Clara. The vindictive glee was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. She wasn't a queen on a throne. She was a pawn who had just realized the game was rigged, and she'd bet everything on the wrong side. "The motion for a vote," I said into the silence, my voice quiet but clear, "is withdrawn." Nobody objected. The aftermath was a quiet tsunami. Julian Croft's empire collapsed within days. His name splashed across financial news sites as a modern-day Madoff. The loans he'd taken out against Ethelgard were called in, but there was nothing to claim. The banks were left holding the bag. Clara moved out of our home the next week. There were no dramatic confrontations. The woman who had run towards a stage to accept a diamond ring now slunk away in the daylight, her belongings in a few boxes. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Eleanor Vance ensured that. Clara received only what was legally hers as a minority shareholder, a settlement that was generous by any objective measure, but a fraction of what she'd imagined she would get with Julian. She kept her car and her personal accounts. She did not get a single piece of my company, my patents, or my home. She tried to call me once, her voice small on the voicemail. "Leo, I didn't know. He made me believe. I'm so sorry." I deleted it. Some bugs in the code can't be fixed. They can only be isolated and prevented from causing more damage. Her apology was for being caught, not for the betrayal itself. She had chosen the stage over the substance, and now she had to live on the stage alone. With the poison removed, Ethelgard didn't just recover, it soared. The attempted theft by a renowned investor became a twisted badge of honor, proof of how valuable our technology truly was. Our clients, once reassured, doubled down on their commitments. Maya, my loyal lead engineer, stepped into the role of Chief Technology Officer, her leadership galvanizing a development team that was now more focused and driven than ever. We rejected the acquisition offers that flooded in from Google, from Apple, from a dozen other giants. The highest was a staggering $3.1 billion. I said no. This wasn't about an exit strategy. It was about building something that lasted. A year later, I stood before the entire company at our new annual summit. There was no marble ballroom, no champagne tower. We rented a warehouse in Soma, filled it with engineers, developers, and support staff, and ordered enough pizza and beer to feed an army. I stood on a makeshift stage, holding a microphone. A year ago, I began. This company was almost stolen by people who saw it as a collection of assets to be leveraged. They saw a price tag. But you... I looked out at the faces of the people who actually built, coded, and supported our work. You never lost sight of what it really is. It's not the valuation, it's the value. I nodded to Maya, who brought up a slide on the screen behind me. It was a simple world map, dotted with thousands of tiny glowing points. Each one of these lights, I said, my voice thickening with an emotion I didn't bother to hide, represents a hospital, a clinic, a research facility, using our quantum encryption to protect patient data. Last week we passed the 5,000 mark. I paused, letting it sink in. And thanks to your work last month, a consortium of European hospitals reported that our systems helped them thwart a major cyber attack aimed at stealing medical records. Your code, your late nights, your passion, that's what protected those people. That is the only metric that ever mattered. The applause was deafening, not the polite clapping of investors, but the roaring, cheering, foot-stomping approval of people who were proud of what they had built. I never saw Clara again. I heard she took a job as a PR director for a mid-tier tech firm in Austin, forever away from the Silicon Valley elite she so desperately wanted to join. She occasionally gives interviews about the importance of due diligence in business and personal partnerships, a line that never fails to draw a wry smile from me. As for me, I finally found a balance. I still code, because that's who I am. But I also lead. I learned that true strength isn't hiding in the background. It's using your voice to protect what you've built and the people who helped you build it. The predators of the world will always mistake quiet creation for weakness. They will always see generosity as an opportunity for exploitation. My revenge wasn't in destroying Julian Croft. The system did that for me. My victory was in building something so resilient, so fundamentally strong that their attempts to break it only revealed their own fragility. I built the system, and I finally learned how to wield its power, not for conquest but for protection, and that made all the difference.